Now that the fins are dry, we need to put on the launch lugs. And these will go on in a similar fashion, although you don't need to wait for them to get tacky since they don't have a lot of weight. So here we're just going to add a bead of glue, and the first launch lug is going to go down here. Okay. And I have a little bit of space there where I didn't have the paint cleared. It's not a big deal. If you want, or if I wanted to, I could just go ahead and scrape a bit off. But I think I've got enough bare area here that it's not going to make much of a difference. And then the same thing with the forward launch lug. Okay, and now I'm going to sight down and make sure everything lines up. So I'm looking at the line and at the launch lugs, and everything should line up. Okay, I'm going to let those dry for a few minutes. Coming up, we will be attaching these trim pieces. And these go alongside the fins, and so I am not going to put on any fin fillets until we do these. Now, according to the instructions, we need to sand these so that the ends are tapered. So these will fit sideways along the fin, and so this surface will be tapered as well as this surface. And this is balsa, so it's fairly porous, and you may want to consider putting some sanding sealer on this after you've shaped it, but before you put it onto the fins. So here I have my trim pieces, and according to the instructions, we need to put a taper at the end 3/8 inches on each end. So I'm just going to measure these here. Okay, and then flip it around and do it again. Okay, and now I'm going to take my sanding tee, and I'm using 150 grit sandpaper here. And now I'm just going to pull this as I make an arc with it. And just keep doing that until I reach my line and the end is tapered down to a chisel like that. Alright, and then just do the same thing on the other side. And just frequently check for evenness. Okay, so that looks about good. And then you'll probably also want to give it a light sanding here, and it's so small that this can be a little bit difficult. Okay, I'm just going to sand off the top surface a little bit here. Okay, and then I'm going to apply a light coat of sanding sealer to the top of this. And then I'm going to do the same thing for all of these guys off camera. So I'll taper their ends as well, give them a little bit of sanding, and then apply sanding sealer to them. After the sanding sealer has dried, then use some 220 grit sandpaper to smooth out the surface once more. And then these will be ready to put on. I have my trim pieces all sanded and shaped. Now I'm going to apply the sanding sealer. This is a new one to me. It's put out by E-Rockets. It doesn't say what's in it, but by the looks it appears to be maybe an emulsion of polyurethane. Kind of smells like white glue. That's what we'll see here. It is a water cleanup type. And here I'm just going to use an applicator to apply it on here. Just put on a smooth coat. I'm trying to avoid the back side of this so that it's still nice and porous for glue adhesion. And this can be recoated if you need more on top there. Oops. And then it requires at least 60 minutes of drying time before you go in and sand it. Okay, so I'm going to do the rest of these off camera. While the fins and the launch lugs and the sanding sealer are all drying, I'm going to move on to installing the ejection baffle here. Now, according to the instructions, they have us put the ejection baffle into the aft body tube first, and then add the forward body tube over it. I'm going to do that in the opposite order. It really doesn't make any difference to the structure, but it allows us to move ahead with construction. So first thing we need to do is mark halfway down the coupler here, so it's going to be at 1 inch. Or 2.5 centimeters. And then we also need to install the shock cord here. So take one end of the shock cord, stick it through the screw eye, and then we're going to tie a double knot or 2 half hitches in this. Like that. Okay, pull on both ends of the shock cord. Initially singly and then together. And this is just going to get all the stretch out of the knot so it doesn't come undone later. And then I'm going to add just a little tiny drop of glue on the knot. And you can use wood glue or white glue for this. Don't use super glue or model cement, because either one of those can melt the rubber here. All right. Also, if you would prefer to replace this with a Kevlar shock cord, you can do the same thing. Now, this is a 1 meter long piece of elastic. If you're going to use Kevlar, I suggest tripling that, so 3 meters or so. And for this rocket, I would recommend between 100 and 300 pound test cord. Now, the one difference here is if you're doing this if you are doing this with Kevlar, when you make your knot here, then do fuse the knot with a little bit of cyanoacrylate glue. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is pick one end of this, and I'm going to stick the shock cord in. Alright, and I'll let that drop through the other end here. Okay, so now I just have a little bit of shock cord there and the coupler. Alright, here I'm going to take my glue once more and an applicator. And as we do this, we want to try to avoid getting glue on the shock cord. Okay, so now I'm just going to run a bead of glue right around the inside here. Okay, and if you do get a little bit of glue on the shock cord, it's okay. At the end of this, we're going to pull this taut so that it's not sitting in the glue. All right, I'm going to find my mark once more here. And now I'm going to push this in with a rotating motion to spread the glue around, right up to my mark. And then on the other end, I'm gently going to pull on this. And I've got just a little bit of stretch in the elastic here. Okay, and I'll put on just a little tiny piece of masking tape. Okay, so once more, I'm just going to put a little tension on this. And put some masking tape on there, and now I'll just leave this until it dries. By having the tension on here, it's pulling the base of the shock cord away from any glue that it might have touched, and now that any remaining glue that's on the shock cord will simply dry. Over time it'll probably fall off, but this way we don't end up trying to glue the shock cord to the inside of the body tube. Okay. I will let that finish drying, and after we've come back and completed all the fins, then we'll put the two of them together. Something else we can do while we're waiting for glue to dry is to prepare the nose cone. Now this nose cone has two seams on it, one on either side. This is a side effect of the molding process. And you've got a few choices of what to do with it. One, you can just ignore it, and you will be able to see a little bit of the seam after it's painted and all. Two, you can try sanding down the seam, and that will help avoid some of it, although it'll take down any edges that are here, but will leave any valleys behind. And the third option is to sand it and then apply some modeling putty onto this. Let that dry and sand it again. And that's what I'm going to do here. So first of all, I'm going to use some 150 grit sandpaper to sand down the ridges here. Okay, now that's left behind quite a few scratches. I'm actually doing that intentionally. So next what I'm going to do is hit this with some 220 grit sandpaper, and this will take some of those scratches down, but then I'm going to extend the 220 sanding all the way around the nose cone. And the idea here is to give it just a little bit of a roughened surface that will help the paint stick to the plastic. This appears to be either polyethylene or polypropylene or a derivative of one of the two. It does not appear to be polystyrene, so paint's probably not going to stick to it as well. So I'm going to roughen this up, and then I'm also going to treat it with a plastic primer that is specifically meant to help hold paint on plastic surfaces. So first we'll go with the lighter sandpaper here. Okay, so now I've sanded it all the way around with special attention to the rough areas that I had sanded before. And already this is feeling a lot smoother. And here I'm going to take a tissue and I'm going to moisten it with a little bit of rubbing alcohol. And I'm just going to use this to remove the plastic sanding dust. Okay, so we no longer have a glossy surface. You can still see fine scratches in it, but that's okay. Once this is primed and painted, it's going to look really nice. So you may decide at this point that this is good enough, and it's certainly better than what it used to be. But if you want to continue to help smooth out the little valleys of the seams and any other little imperfections. You can use this plastic modeling clay or modeling putty. There are a few different brands of this. This one happens to be Testers. And I'm just going to run this along that seam. Got a little bit off there. Alright, there's a little imperfection there. And I just take a finger and smooth this in. This stuff is non-toxic. I believe it has an alcohol base. It does set up and dry pretty quickly here, so you want to do this rather rapidly. Okay, and mainly just smooth it down a little. This doesn't have to be perfect at this point. We're going to sand most of it off. Okay, and now I'm going to do the other seam. There's just a little bit of an imperfection here at the tip. I'm going to fill it in. And once more, just smooth this in with a finger. It does not have to be perfect. Just make sure you've got your holes filled in. Okay, and then we're going to let this dry for about 30 minutes and then come back and sand away most of that putty. One other thing we can do while we're waiting for everything else to dry is prepare the parachute. And here you're going to want a snap swivel like this. You can get this in the fishing department of department stores and sporting goods stores and such. And the main thing you need to worry about is making sure that the clip part is large enough to fit over the eyelet on the nose cone. So you should be able to close that without a lot of difficulty. The rest of the size doesn't really matter. Even the smallest of these are rated for weights that are quite a bit heavier than your rocket is. Now you can just tie the parachute directly to the nose cone, and if that's what you want to do, just follow the instructions as they're written. It's pretty straightforward. But by now, if you've seen any of my other videos, I just don't do that. There are so many more advantages to having a snap swivel on there that I don't even bother with direct tie-ons of parachutes anymore. Okay, so this will allow us to change out the parachute rapidly. You can take the parachute out for storage. It also, with the swivel on here, helps eliminate at least some of the twisting of the shroud lines that happens during recovery. It won't do everything. It's not a miracle worker, but it does help in that. So here, go ahead and open up the parachute. And there are 3 loops that make up the shroud lines here. So gather those up and then just loop them all across your finger like this. And then you're going to grab the middle of the parachute. Alright, now here's my shroud lines. They're all gathered around one finger. And on the other side, what we want to do is bring all of those corners as close together as possible. They don't need to be perfect, but fairly close to each other. Okay, and then over here on my other end again, I'm pinching together the shroud lines so they don't move from those relative positions. So now I've got a loop, and keeping my fingers on the strings so they don't move, I'm going to put this down into a small enough bit that I can pass it through the eyelet of the snap swivel. So over on the swivel side, you don't want to pass it through the snap itself. Alright, and now I'm going to pass the entire snap swivel through that loop, bring it down, and then pull it taut. Okay, and that's going to give us a nice knot there. Okay, go back and check it. Make sure your shroud lines are all pretty much the same length there, and they are. And then the last thing to do is just take a little bit of white glue or wood glue and just work that into the knot there. Happen to have a little bit right on the end. Not quite enough. go. Just a little touch. Work that into the knot, and that'll keep it from coming loose once tension is no longer put on the screw eye. Okay, and now you can just, for now, fold this back up loosely and set it aside. The putty has dried and I've sanded it off again, and so you'll see there's just a few areas where you can still see the remaining putty, and that's filling in the low spots, and that's about the way it should look. I have also re-sanded the little trim pieces here for the fins. And now it's time to put them on. So these are going to fit right along the root of the fin, extending from flush of the trailing edge of the fin and then up this way until it reaches its end. And to put these on, we'll simply put on a small film of glue. And here again you can use white or wood glue. Okay, so I'm not going to put a lot on here, and I'm going to smear that into a nice thin even coat. And place that on. Okay, and just press it in a little bit there. Alright. And then just continue this all the way around. So each fin will have one of these trim pieces on each side of it. And once those have dried, then we can go ahead and put in the fillets for the fins, for the launch lugs, and for the trim pieces themselves. Now the trim pieces are largely decorative, but they do help hold the fins in place, and so if you want, you may want to clear a little bit of the primer here to get a better gluing surface on the tube. Okay, now you don't have to do this, and it's probably not going to adversely affect the model too much if you don't. But it's just something to consider. Now that the trim pieces are all on, the next step is to add the fillets. So I've got some tissues here handy. And to do this, we're going to do it in kind of several pieces here. So first I'm going to do the base of the fin and the trim. So I'm going to come in here and add a bead of glue. And kind of let that bump down and then finish along the base there. Okay, and then I'm also going to put one up here and use a smaller amount of glue. We want to try and keep the trim piece reasonably flat though, because there are some decals that will go on to that. And so here now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to fill in the top one first. And now I'm going to do the bottom part here and just smooth it all in. Okay, notice there's a little piece of my fin paper here that got stuck there, and that I will just sand off once the glue is dried. Okay, I'm going to give this one more going over here. Okay, and now I'm going to repeat this for the rest of the fins. Now you'll want to keep the model horizontal while the glue is drying, otherwise it will tend to run toward gravity. And especially if you're using wood glue, just do one face at a time. So put in this fillet and this fillet, let it dry, and then turn it. With wood glue, that's less of a problem as it does dry quite a bit quicker, but you still might want to give 5 minutes or so between faces before you move to the next one. My fillets are still setting up, but they're dry enough that I can work with the rocket. And the last two structural steps we have then, one is to attach the two body tubes together, and then the final part will be to attach the nose cone. And then after that, all we need to do is paint and apply the decals. So down here on the lower body tube, I'm going to add some glue just inside there so that we can glue in the other side of the coupler. Okay, I'm going to put just a little on the edge there to help fill the little crack that forms when we stick these together. And we'll just wipe off the excess glue. Alright, and now it's just a matter of inserting this, giving a little twisty motion as we go in. Okay, and I'm going to hold that in there. Smooth out that little bit of glue. And it's trying to pop open there a little bit as the glue works its way in. So what I'm going to do here is just add a little bit of masking tape so that this hardens all together and doesn't produce as much of a gap. And I'll just take that off after about half an hour or so. And then our last structural component is the nose cone here. And so, just like we did on the other end, go ahead and tie 2 double knots here, or 2 single knots, making a double knot. Now I'm not going to do this really tight yet because I'm going to take this back off and paint the nose cone separate from the rest of the rocket. But when you're ready to put this on, do it just like this. Pull both ends just as we did with the other end of the shock cord, and then apply a little bit of glue there. If you're using Kevlar, same thing, but use super glue on the knot. But I'm going to go ahead and take that back off. When this is all ready to go, then all we have to do is clip the parachute on here, and it will be ready to fly. Okay, so structurally the rocket's done, but I am going to continue this video with painting and applying the decals. This has got some pretty intricate vinyl decals, and so we'll include those in the video. So to start my painting, I have taken the nose cone here and masked off the shoulder and then taped on a little dowel here to hold it. And I'm going to treat this with a universal primer. It's one that's specifically meant to help paint bond to this type of plastic. At this point, the glue for the body tubes has completely cured, and so that's a nice one long piece there. And the universal primer on the nose cone has also dried. So my next step will be to give the rocket at least one more coat of the filler type of primer to fill in any of the gaps that might still be left here, fill in any little tiny bubbles around the fillets and such. And then the nose cone is going to get sprayed with its finishing color of black. Over the last couple of days, I've painted the nose cone black and the rocket itself yellow. And at this point, it's time to put on the decals. So according to the instructions, we're going to take the very end of the body tube here, and then we're going to wrap it with our fin guide again. And the way we want to do this is have the launch lug line aligned with the launch lugs, and you can just approximate this. It doesn't have to be completely exact. And we can always turn this once we get it in position. Alright, so I'm just going to tape this in place, a little bit of masking tape here. Okay, now I can't show this on camera very easily, but I'm sighting down through the launch lugs to my guide here, and I'm going to turn it just a little bit. I have to loosen the tape to do that. Okay, and on the opposite side of that is our reference line for the decals. And so here I am just going to make a very small mark right here. And that will be my reference line for the decals. Now the first decals to go on have kind of an arc to them, and the point of that arc is going to go right at that line. So I don't need to have this very big. Most of the decals are of self-adhesive vinyl, and if you've worked with vinyl decals before, you may know that it's often easier to apply these if we wet them with a little bit of water that has just a couple of drops of dishwashing liquid in it. So that's what I've got here in this tray. And so the first ones are these kind of curved, almost Y-shaped decals here, and these are going to go right along the edge of the forward part of the body tube. This is kind of a long rocket, so you want to find a space where you can work with it without bumping into a lot of stuff. And now I'm going to peel off one corner of this. If you can't quite get a fingernail under there, you can use your hobby knife. Right. And in the instructions, they recommend wetting the rocket. I actually prefer to wet the decal. Just like that. Okay, and the sharp delineation here is going to go right there. Okay. And we want this to go right along the edge. If you need to, you can bring it up just a little bit. So it's better to have it too far up than too far down, because we can trim the vinyl if we need to. There. Okay, and then just take a tissue or a paper towel and wipe off the excess water. And that will also help squeeze the air bubbles out. Alright, and then we're going to do the same thing here with the other one, and it should reach all the way around and attach to the previous one. So here again, I've got this moistened. Put the corner right there at the previous mark. Okay, and in general, you want to keep some tension on this, but you don't want to stretch them. Alright, so we've got a big difference in gap there, probably because of the thickness of the paint and the primer. So I'm just going to reposition both of them here. Alright, that's pretty close. The next decals are these two long black strips, and these will extend from our initial decals here down the length of the rocket. And then after that, we'll have another set of 2 strips, and these ones are tapered at the aft end, and those will go further down the rocket. Okay, so here I'm just going to peel up a strip. Okay, and just pull that through the water there. The idea here is to get this right at the initial decal there, as straight as you can. Okay, and again, this is going to be hard to see in the video, but what we want to do here is sight along this to make sure it's straight with the rest of the rocket, and you can peel up the strip as you need to do so. And once more, I'm going to squeegee off the excess water here just with a tissue. And I'm going to go ahead and continue with the tapered one here so that I do one side of the rocket all at once. Okay, I'll go ahead and moisten that. And then once more I'm going to align this. And the idea here is to get them exactly edge to edge, with no overlap and no gap. And that's the tricky part. Okay, and then once more, sight down the rocket. That's really crooked. Okay, and squeegee that out again. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side here. I'm going to do that off camera though, just because this does take a while. The next decals are the name and logo ones here. So this has the Arcturus name on it. And this is supposed to go in between the stripes. Okay, like this. So the A should be facing the top. And they recommend doing this in one of 3 ways, and I really don't like any of them. But one is to put some masking tape across the front, and then carefully peel up each one of the letters, making sure that it stays attached to the masking tape. And then you can put them all over at once and put those onto the rocket. The next not very good way to do it is to take out each letter one by one and put it on the rocket. That is also going to be problematic because it's really hard to get them lined back up again. And then the third possibility is to take the letters out, cut this out lengthwise so that it acts as a stencil, paint the letters on, and then remove the vinyl stencil. Okay, like I said, I don't really like any of those. But I'm going to try the first way and put some masking tape across these. And I'm kind of concerned that my masking tape is just a little bit wide. But we'll try this and see how it goes. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut these apart just to make it easier to work with them. Okay, now if we carefully peel this back, okay, the letters are trying to come up and we don't want that. If you have difficulty from one direction, you might try another. You may also need to use your hobby knife here to keep the letters on. Okay, that's working better. Okay, so here I'm going to try to do this without using water on it, which means I really have to be careful of my placement. Okay, so they don't give an exact placement distance here, so I'm just going to try and line it up as best I can. Okay, and so what I've got is looking like that. Okay, and I'm going to sight down through it. Hopefully I've got that reasonably straight. Okay, and now I'm just going to push in on the middle. Okay, and now I'm going to try and do two things here at once. So I'm going to separate the masking tape from the vinyl. Okay, now I'm not too concerned about the outer material here. I want to make sure that my letters are staying in place. So as I peel this up, I'm just kind of squishing them down a little bit. This is actually going a lot better than I thought it would. Yeah. Famous last words. Murphy strikes again. Alright, so we get that back down. Alright, this mostly worked better than I thought it would. I'm going to have to fix that S. Okay, now I can just use my hobby knife to hold things in place while I peel this outer vinyl back. Trying very hard not to peel up the paint when it's not necessarily cooperating. Alright, now that R has a piece inside it there. Caught a little bit of paint on that one. This is just going to take a lot of patience. Caught a little bit of paint there again. Alright, so we have a few minor incidents here, but it's not too bad. Okay, and just go on and rub all these on. Okay, that actually looks pretty good. We can come back when we're finished and just use a little bit of brush on paint to touch up those little chips. Okay, and then we'll just simply do the same thing on the back here, and I'll do that one off camera. The last of the vinyl decals here are of the shooting star logo here, and these are meant to be applied with the same spacing that it shows here. So if you wanted to, you can even try the masking tape method that we did with the letters, though I think I'm just going to place these by hand. And according to the instructions, this should be 10 inches from the forward end of the body tube. Now I'm not going to make a mark, I'm just going to get an idea of where that is. Okay, so the edge of the star should be about there. Okay, so that's going to go like this. And coming back to the picture here, the tail of it is going straight back. I'll go ahead and try using the tape here. Alright, and then I'm going to peel this off. I'm going to have to use the hobby knife here. Alright, now I didn't quite get the beginning of the tail. Bring that up like that. There we go. Okay, now I'm looking through this. And let me get back to my ruler here and give myself an idea. So right about here. And now I'm just trying to line up the tail, which is right here along the edge of my tape. Okay, and I'm going to sight down that pretty close. Alright, so here I'm just going to kind of tap this down, get some initial adhesion. Alright, I'm just going to smooth this out, the bubbles out. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Okay, smooth the rest of it out there. Okay, and I'm going to turn this over and do the second side in the same way, off camera, and then I'll come back. The last decals to go on are these screw set decals, and initially I thought these were water slide. They're actually self-adhesive as well, and they're meant to be cut out without the lines. Okay, so this is going to get cut like that. Okay, and then like this. And then these go on to the middle of the fin pieces here. Okay, so you can do this with your fingers. You might want some tweezers to help position them. And again, if you don't have very good fingernails, you might want to use your hobby knife. There we go. Okay, so this is meant to go right in the middle. I'm going to grab some tweezers here. Okay. This will go right in the middle of this fin plate. Like that. And then just rub that in with a fingernail or with the end of your hobby knife. Okay, and we just need to put one of those on each of the fin plates. Okay, with that, this rocket is finished. So we've got our detail screws there, got the line going up, and all the way up to our nose cone there. This has been a really fun rocket to build. Even though the decals at first looked daunting, the masking tape method worked a lot better than I thought it was going to. And we have a really nice rocket at the end here. So with that, have a good launch, a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for my next video.